So thank you everyone for coming today, and thank you for joining me online as well. My name is Emily Doyle, and I'm here today to present the results of a case study of the school in Habour Grace, St. Francis, and the attached greenhouse. This is a picture of the school right here. Like Bowen mentioned, the study was funded by the Harris Center, also by Research and Grad Studies, and my supervisor, Dr. Martha Traverso-Yepes. So a quick overview of the presentation. I'm going to introduce my research question, the background to the research, and the methods that I used. Next, I'll discuss the results from the St. Francis case study. And finally, I'd like to answer any questions you have, but also listen to your comments and experiences if you have been involved in school gardening initiatives. So school gardens are popping up all across the province. This is the first investigation in Newfoundland into the form and function of these gardens. Although there has been research done elsewhere in Canada and North America, this is the first time that it's been done in this province. And it's interesting to do in this province because we have a range of local social and economic demands that frame this research. So the province, our understanding of food production and distribution has changed dramatically over the past century or so, as we've transferred to using our environment to grow food and harvest food to essentially supplement our diets, to now where usually when we grow food, it's just a choice of lifestyle. It's not something that we're required to do for our survival. Now we have thousands of imported foodstuffs to depend on, and which most of us do. Secondly, many of those who hold the knowledge about gardening are aging, and a lot of young people who would be the retainers of that knowledge are leaving the province in search of employment. So our entire population is also at a higher risk of chronic disease than the rest of the country, which is something that is directly attributed to possibly these changes in diet and lifestyle. So a number of provincial policies address these issues. Health and education policies advocate healthy living and healthy eating and active living. These advocate the retaining of youth, and agricultural policies press upon the need for enhanced skill development and enhanced food security. So the purpose of this project was to provide a detailed analysis of how students, teachers, community members, and government officials experience and perceive the school greenhouse. This includes their motivating factors, expectations, facilitators and deterrents, and practices deemed most official for achieving health and learning outcomes. A quick literature review. Some of the research benefits of school gardens include the promotion of healthy eating and active living, an enhancement of school community and social inclusion, the greening of school grounds, raising awareness about the environment, climate change, and agriculture, and fostering place-based learning. So place-based learning is when students are brought into the external community to learn curriculum concepts and also to help solve community problems. Place-based learning has been associated with individual and societal benefits. Okay, the method. The different kinds of benefits that school gardens can provide reveals the complexity of studying them. So there are multiple pathways that each program could follow that will lead to unique impacts for individuals. For example, do gardens benefit student achievement because students are eating healthier and therefore able to focus better? Or because peer relationships are fostered through cooperative learning and students gain self-esteem? Or somehow else? There are a number of different pathways. So Ozer, in her review of school gardens, suggests adopting a socio-ecological model to trace these effects in a systematic way. So a socio-ecological framework supports a holistic understanding of social development that draws attention to the different contexts that shape one's life and how they may influence each other or the individuals involved. Changes in multiple systems include the individual, the school, the community, etc., and also interactions between these systems and how they may lead to diverse outcomes. Oh, sorry, I forgot to to describe that I used focus groups, a student survey, and a series of interviews to collect my research data. So before I want to begin, I just want to provide a brief overview of the presence of school gardens throughout Canada. Beginning on the West Coast, in 2010, the Vancouver School Board passed a school food garden policy statement and a process to help schools that want to start gardening. The Vancouver School Board is also linked with UBC in a project called Think and Eat Green at School, which looks at all aspects of school food systems, including growing food, purchasing food, school nutrition, and more. So that's a really interesting project. In Ontario, there's a group called Sustain Ontario, which is a cross-sectoral alliance that takes a collaborative approach to issues about sustainable agriculture. And they promote school gardens as a good food policy. And last year, they held their first ever school garden day in Ontario. So all across the country, there are a number of schools using gardens and a number of nonprofit agencies who support those gardens, such as the Saskatchewan-based Agriculture in the Classroom program. And in Newfoundland, the Food Security Network has held a lead role in supporting these types of initiatives. Now, a brief introduction to St. Francis, the greenhouse. This is a picture from the inside of the greenhouse. So it's a 2,400 square foot polycarbonate structure that was built in 1992, so I think that's 21 years ago, to help students develop hands-on entrepreneurial skills in the greenhouse industry. So it's kind of interesting that when it was built, it wasn't built with the intention of exposing children to healthy food. It was more exposing children to entrepreneurial skills and kind of diversifying the economy. So it changed, its function has changed to kind of answer the trends or the needs of the province, which is interesting. At the time, it was a several $100,000 investment funded through ACOA and HRDC. So the greenhouse was intentionally very automated so that teachers wouldn't have to be constantly watering, having to deal with temperature, ventilation, lighting. All of this was automated. But that relied on a very large investment at the beginning. The technologies that were incorporated into the greenhouse inspired more technologies, and they put in a webcam so that the greenhouse could be used as a resource for schools off-site as well. So through the years, the greenhouse has received national recognition and has also partnered with multiple community groups, including the Lower Trinity South Development Board, the College of the North Atlantic, local farms and landscaping businesses, and the Eastern School District. So this was an especially beneficial case study because it has such a long history, and there has been definite lulls in funding, but also highs in funding. So it's interesting to track what kind of impact that does have on programming. I was describing to a teacher here today that currently the greenhouse does not have funding, so this wouldn't be what it would look like inside today. It might be full of boxes, I don't know, but I think that they're very dependent on funding, so that's one of the things we'll get into. Okay. So the greenhouse has altered the landscape of the school. A shed was built to house equipment for the structure. Outdoor gardens have been built around the building, and trees and flowers grown in the school's greenhouse decorate the landscape. The greenhouse has also altered the way teachers teach and the way students learn and the way the school interacts with the community. So the following results will provide a description of how these changes were experienced by students, community members, government officials, and those include perceptions of how the garden influenced the students, a student survey, participants' motivations and experiences, interactions between the greenhouse and the community, and necessary conditions for sustained school gardening. So due to the fact that the school was undergoing transition when I did this research, it was changing from a K-8 to a junior high, the gardening program was on a hiatus. and therefore the student survey had a low response rate. So this is a recognized flaw to my study, as it would be very important to directly observe how students are actively participating in the greenhouse to understand pathways by which gardening influences their development. So I will address this in future research, but it's just the reality of the situation for this research. However, responses from the 5 students that I did hear from confirm the observations made by teachers, community members, and government officials. Students wanted more opportunities to be in the greenhouse and enjoyed the greenhouse activities. They did not believe that gardening increased their activity levels, which is interesting because gardening is widely acknowledged as a source of activity. So I'll get into that a bit later. So participants mentioned a number of positive outcomes related to hands-on learning aspect of gardening at school. Those include positive development, exposure to healthy food and agriculture, and exposure to work skills and to the environment. In terms of positive development, teachers and community members observed that children experienced pride, motivation, excitement, and felt purpose through hands-on learning. So as this teacher says, it's hands-on. They can see the benefits of their investment of time and work. They can take pride in that as a sense of self-fulfillment and accomplishment and contribution. So this is something that's very important for all of us to be able to feel all the time, and it was overwhelming to hear how much positive feelings that the teachers felt that the students were experiencing. An additional benefit was the associated meaning that grew out of that hands-on learning. Teachers believed strengthened students' memories of the things that they were learning in the greenhouse because they attached more meaning to those events. So it enhanced learning. Also, in the greenhouse, students tended to work together, and differences between students were less articulated. The greenhouse as an extracurricular activity was found to appeal to students that might not have fit in elsewhere. So it appeals to students who have a different approach to learning, kinesthetic learners, naturalistic learners, and students who are more hands-on than paper and pencil. So other research of school gardens has shown that the type of cooperative learning that happens in the greenhouse is associated with better peer relationships as well as higher academic achievement. So 2 important findings. Okay. Next is the finding that students were exposed and motivated by the aesthetics of the greenhouse, to the agricultural industry, and to healthy food. So students were positively motivated by the aesthetics of the greenhouse. This teacher expresses they really liked playing in the dirt. I think they thought sensory-wise it was probably very sensory fulfilling. There's something about the light out here and the heat, the building structure itself, the greenhouse. They seem to really enjoy that part of it. So I don't know how many of you have spent a lot of time within schools, but generally they're not sources of light and heat and greenery. So that's something really special for students and for teachers. Teachers also commented that being in the greenhouse was therapeutic for them, which is a good finding. So teachers expressed that kids are not typically introduced to farming as a potential career in school. Typically, students will be driven on a pathway towards becoming teachers, doctors, engineers, but they found that, you know, it wasn't generally encouraged, oh, you can be a farmer, and that would be a good career for you to find. So one year, a good example of students learning the alternative was when they grew they grew lettuce at a local farm, and this involved planting the lettuce in the greenhouse, transplanting it into the farm, going to the farm regularly to check on crop growth, harvesting the lettuce, packaging it, and selling it at the local grocery store. So very comprehensive engagement in what it would mean to be a producer. So that was pretty cool. And teachers and community members noted that students were exposed to foods that they might not have been otherwise, increasing the likelihood that they would try these foods. So green peppers, you know, different herbs and things that they wouldn't try elsewhere. They would try because they had put their hands into growing those crops. Exposure to work skills in the environment. So the greenhouse provided a work experience for students. One example is when the students grew tomatoes and partnered with the College of the North Atlantic to process those tomatoes and into salsa. So they learned all the food skills preparation that they would need to safely produce a processed product, and then sold those tomatoes for profit. Teachers reported that the skills taught in the greenhouse were used by students to find employment after school. So there were some examples of students directly finding employment because of the skills that they had learned in the greenhouse. Also, students developed environmentally friendly attitudes. So this teacher says, in terms of appreciating your own ecology and your own environment, I mean, where else is the best lesson than to see what the earth can produce and what it needs to produce? And you've got to look after it. If you don't look after it, it dies. So our world is no different than that. Also, in terms of the environment, students learned about the soil and the environmental impact of transporting food. And the raising of environmental awareness is important today, and that exposure to soil awareness and that type of thing, because children are spending less time outdoors and more time indoors. So that's a significant finding. So themes that surfaced when considering how the greenhouse impacted the teachers and the community members and the government officials included a felt need to teach kids about food, the opportunity to learn, the relevance of hands-on learning, and the enrichment of the school culture. So quickly, I'll just deal with the opportunity to learn. Teachers reported that they were motivated to learn in the greenhouse, not just the children, but they wanted to learn about crop development and plant production. And they also felt proud of the fact that their school was known for its greenhouse. When they encountered people with other schools and they heard them say, oh, you're from that school with the greenhouse, they were proud of that fact. So the need to teach kids about food. This theme speaks directly to the fact that we have changing food lifestyles. Many teachers were growers themselves and felt a concern about the health of imported food and a concern for food security. As this teacher says, you're producing vegetables, so you've got healthier food to eat, which is a big thing with pesticides, and you hear about different issues with foods and what's added to foods to preserve them and whatnot. And on another level, we've gotten away from growing our own food, our own vegetables as a family over the last 50 or 60 years. So I think that is something we should all get back to. This is a theme that kept on coming up from a number of different community members, government officials, and teachers. This loss of knowledge, but also a concern for the current food that we eat, the health of that food. So community members echoed this concern that if no one reinforces the skill set of growing food, then it will be lost. This community member says, to me, it was something familiar, but most children now don't know where it comes from. They think it just comes from the supermarket. And an interesting thing, can you see this slide okay? Okay. An interesting thing one community member mentioned is the importance of learning hands-on skills for community development. So, as I said before, not everyone is going to be doctors and lawyers. We have to have mechanics and we have to have other labor people, and in particular, we have to have people to grow food. So the importance of developing those skills within school to be able to produce food. Teachers, community members, and government officials also noted how the presence of the greenhouse helps to build a culture of health and opportunity. Strengthen connections between the students, between the school and the surrounding community are measures of comprehensive school health. So comprehensive school health is recognized as the most effective way to build schools and to address health. Not just the physical health, but social health, emotional health, environmental health. It's a holistic view of health. So this view of comprehensive health still requires a lot of education and awareness building, because many people, when you speak to them of health, think more in terms of their physical health. So this one quote here from a government official is a standalone comment. This person was the only person to actually have that social view of health, or kind of holistic view of how the greenhouse was affecting health. So here he or she says, anything that helps with the coming together of people is going to help improve the collective health of the group, because we know that sense of connection and diminishing of isolation, sharing of skills and ideas, if people have those connections, the chances are they're going to feel better about themselves. So, although many participants did mention the social benefits of gardening, it wasn't necessarily linked to health. And I found this an important thing, an important point to focus on, in addition to the fact that students didn't view the greenhouse as a physical activity. That is kind of a missed opportunity in envisioning the way that the greenhouse can affect the school in the future. Because if you broaden your perspective of what health is, well, then you're broadening your perspective of what you can do in the greenhouse to create a healthier school culture. So teachers and community members were also inspired to make activities that linked to the greenhouse. The greenhouse helped to leverage resources, and that's why I say it helps to build a culture of opportunity. So one government official stated, the greenhouse has stood pretty solid for up to 20 to 25 years, and they had the foresight to say, we're going to build something top-notch, we're investing in a solid structure. To me, that was one of the best decisions that they made. So it's not to say that you need a $100,000 structure to inspire you to do greenhouse activities or to do gardening at school, but it does speak to the importance of the built environment in motivating actions and ideas. So had that greenhouse not been there, one teacher might not have started a gardening program. So although we don't usually throw a lot of money into things in order to inspire people, it did have an interesting effect for this community and this school. I learned in my interviews that initially the greenhouse was named after a janitor for the school who had built a wooden greenhouse outside the school. So it's kind of a historical history of, you know, people being inspired by the actions of others. So it started with a very small wooden structure. It developed into this large technological, speaks to the importance of having that built environment. So teachers, community members, and government officials described a number of beneficial interactions between the greenhouse and the community. These included community building and potential economic effects. So in terms of community building, there were a number of examples of the use of place-based learning, which I've already mentioned. Another example is when the students grew a number of beets, an overwhelming amount of beets, and teachers were faced with the challenge of what to do with this grocery truckload of beets. So parents volunteered with the kids in processing and packaging, and then they sold these packaged processed beets as a fundraiser. So this is an example where the school worked with the surrounding community to solve a problem, and this type of action, this type of place-based learning has been found in the literature to lead to enhanced enthusiasm for learning, increased youth engagement, and the betterment of community health. So again, this is the beet story is a story that I heard post that happening. So I wasn't directly able to research this kind of place-based learning, but it would be something very interesting for further research to actually be able to look at students as they're engaging in this type of place-based learning and interview community members and see what kind of direct impact that's having on their lives. Is it changing the way they feel about their communities, the way they want to interact with their communities? So necessary conditions for school garden programming. Two themes in terms of the facilitators and deterrents for sustained school garden programs include the complexity of the school environment and the dependence and the availability of resources. So over the 21 years that the St. Francis Greenhouse has existed, there have been drastic changes in the organization of the school, including the change from non-secular to secular, which one teacher felt led to the loss of control at the school level. Also, there's been a lot of turnover in terms of administration and staff. When I first started my research, my main contact was the vice principal, who was the lead of the greenhouse committee. And by the end of the school year, he was being transferred to a different school. So that just spoke to the type of turnover that is happening at schools all the time. As one teacher also told me, though, change is not always a bad thing. So sometimes turnover leads to new energy, and that can have a beneficial effect. The greenhouse also was found to require a lot of energy from teachers who already have very full workloads. So that is a definite problem with introducing greenhouses to the school environment, that often the responsibility lies on the teachers, but they're full already. So that question needs to be answered. Programming in the school environment also requires extra attention to potential liabilities and regulations, and this is something for other schools to consider when planning their greenhouses. Another theme in understanding how to sustain the greenhouse, or the garden program, is the dependency and availability of resources. So community members, teachers, and government officials all report that sustaining the greenhouse requires a lot of energy and resources. This includes requiring leadership, having knowledge about plant production, having knowledge about project management, about applying for funding, this type of thing. And also people to visit the garden after hours and on the weekend. Also, a number of respondents spoke to the availability of resources for sustaining the program. So potential resources included using the greenhouse as a fundraiser. There is an issue with competition when using the greenhouse as a fundraiser, though, which is that some local growers or farmers might perceive the greenhouse as unfairly with them because they're getting some government support to develop the same products that the growers would be doing without that kind of support. And how the greenhouse has dealt with this in the past is that they made a deal with local growers that they would only offer things that were not being offered by these local growers. But that is an interesting thing that I think requires further drawing out to figure out how the greenhouse can use itself as a fundraiser in order to support programming. So also there are a number of connections. One government official suggested the idea of starting a directory of people in the community who did have knowledge or experience in plant production and being able to contact those people to pull them into the greenhouse. So this community member describes, the potential is here, the grounds, the building, the college for a year-round operation and getting more people involved. And I think that based on one discussion with a community member, this kind of connectivity at the community level is enhanced, at least in Habour Grace. It was very easy for different community groups to connect with each other because oftentimes it might be one person that is both on the parents' council and also works in the municipality or something like this. So drawing upon those community connections seem to be facilitated in at least this rural community. So that's an interesting benefit. So to wrap up this presentation, I'd like to present issues that were identified in Greenhouse Alive. So the possibilities and challenges of having multiple departmental benefits, as described by this government official. It's an interdepartmental thing for sure. Your benefits are expanding way beyond what kids have to learn. If you're going to bring in parent involvement or other community partner involvement, then you've got a municipal thing happening. And you've got a skill set and a knowledge base being built into the community. Then you've got your health promotion piece that goes with it. So Some of the connections mentioned in terms of government departments during my research: health department, the education department, agriculture, municipalities, tourism, culture and recreation, the poverty reduction strategy. So you have all of these departments external to the school environment that are aware and conscious of the potentials of such an activity. So multiple benefits, but also this can also be a stumbling block when you're trying to determine who's going to take the lead of this project. So the school's fundamental role is to provide education. It's not necessarily to provide all these external community benefits, health benefits. So I think this was a government official who said, I think that with the greenhouse, it's like any project. There has to be someone who owns it to keep it together, to keep it going, coordinated, and organized. If no one claims ownership, it'll go dormant. No one will make sure things are happening. So I think this is a risk for this type of project. But you can see out of this risk, there's also that big opportunity because you do have this broad base of support. So finally, the best evidence that this greenhouse has had an important role to play in the school and in the Habour Grace community is the fact that the school and community continually fight for its continued existence. And 21 years is a significant history for that greenhouse to have. So that is it.